They kept him in a lead-lined room, deep beneath the old St. Albans Institute. No windows, no clocks, no mirrors, just silence and observation. Every hour, on the hour, two men in iron-tipped boots would walk the corridor and peer into the single slit in the door. But he was never where they left him. One moment, lying flat on the cot. The next, standing behind them. No sound, no breath, just those gray eyes. Watching, measuring, waiting. His name was Caleb Morgan. In the winter of 1872, he became the most dangerous secret in the American scientific community. Because Caleb didn't open doors. He walked through them. And the first time the U.S. government saw him do it, half the men in that room swore they'd seen a ghost. The other half never spoke again. This story wasn't meant to reach you. It was sealed in a government archive under something called Directive Number 41B, the kind of label reserved for threats not to national security, but to national reality. It wasn't war. It wasn't politics. It was a boy who shattered the laws that make the world predictable. This is not a myth. This is not folklore. This is a documented, witnessed, and deeply buried truth. A case file marked with so many redacted lines it reads like a confession wrapped in silence. Caleb Morgan was 11 years old when his name was first recorded in the federal census. But if you trace his birth certificate, it vanishes mid-page like someone tore the truth out by hand. No record of parents. No known place of origin. Just one line, scribbled in a Union Army field ledger. Boy found near Camp Echo. Unharmed. Walls locked from inside. Men have been punished for less than knowing this. But you're not like most men. You felt it too. That tug of something behind the curtain of history. That burning sense that the world is not what it claims. That there are people born different. People like Caleb. They didn't want you to know. But it's too late now. You're already inside. The first confirmed sighting wasn't in a city. It wasn't in some candlelit seance or spiritualist parlor. It happened in the frostbitten emptiness of Echo Basin, Utah Territory, February 1872. Two Union surveyors, Alexander Pike and Elijah Garrison, were charting abandoned Civil War tunnels, remnants of old gold routes the government wanted closed. They found the entrance half collapsed, sealed with heavy timbers. No footprints, no sign of entry, just silence and cold. Inside, they found him, a boy, no coat, no tools, no light, just standing in the dark. Not afraid, not shivering, just watching. Garrison panicked, drew his weapon, demanded answers. Who was he? How'd he get there? No response. Pike stepped forward, hand out. You hurt, son? The boy turned, took one step back, and vanished into the wall behind him. Not a trick of light, not a shadow. The stone itself seemed to ripple, absorb him, and go still. No door, no sound, just the stench of scorched earth and something else like copper and ash. The men ran. They told no one for 72 hours. But guilt chews the soul faster than rot. Garrison drank himself into a coma. Pike confessed to a railway agent in Cheyenne, who, to his surprise, didn't laugh. He handed Pike a sealed envelope. Inside was a photograph. Grainy, blurred, but unmistakable. The same boy, same face, same eyes, taken 6 years earlier in Virginia. You saw him too, the agent whispered. They call him the Echo Child. And you don't find him. He finds you. From there, the file grows darker. By April, 4 separate federal departments had received reports of the wall walker. One from a mining foreman whose tools vanished nightly, then reappeared sealed in locked cabinets. One from a telegraph operator who claimed the boy interrupted a transmission by touching the wire itself. And the final, most disturbing, a Union doctor at Camp Monroe who watched the boy pass directly through a reinforced iron cell. The implications broke men's minds. Physics couldn't explain it. Theology wouldn't touch it. And medicine? It declared him an impossibility. But they still tried. They brought him in, sectioned him off. And that's when the real experiments began. You want the truth? The government didn't try to protect him. They tried to weaponize him. They called it Project Winterdoor, a name buried so deep it doesn't exist in any official archive. But fragments remain. Torn memos, handwritten notes, Testimonies whispered by men who died with their eyes open. Project Winter Door wasn't about study. It wasn't about science. It was about control, the kind that rewrites the limits of power itself. Caleb Morgan was moved to a classified facility beneath the St. Albans Institute in Vermont, an old asylum restructured for psychological experimentation. They put him in a sealed room with 12-inch steel walls and a two-way mirror. They observed, measured, recorded. They fed him twice a day. No physical contact, no spoken orders, just silence and surveillance. He never screamed, never cried. He would sit perfectly still for hours, then vanish without a sound, only to reappear in another part of the facility, in the corner of someone's office, behind locked doors, once in the director's private quarters at exactly 3:33 a.m. No alarm tripped, no camera caught it. He was simply there. They tried restraining him. Failed. They tried drugging him. He didn't respond. They even attempted electroshock while he was unconscious. The machine blew a circuit. 2 technicians were found collapsed, bleeding from their noses. The lights flickered for 3 full minutes. When they came back on, Caleb stood at the center of the room again. Eyes open, smile faint, a single phrase written on the mirror in backward script. You are not in charge. From that moment, fear replaced fascination. One scientist, Dr. Elgin Rowe, had the audacity to ask Caleb directly, "How do you do it? Where do you go?" Caleb stared at him for a long time and replied, in perfect calm, "Where doors end, I begin. You think you know how the world works? Matter, force, time, mass? You think reality is solid just because you can't see through it?" Caleb Morgan was proof that the laws were never laws, just agreements. Agreed upon by people too terrified to question what came before the first rule. And what came before? That's where Caleb walked. But here's the part that truly breaks the mind. He wasn't alone. There were others. And Caleb had seen them. They didn't believe him at first. Caleb spoke of others. Not in fear. Not in awe. But in the tone of someone recalling classmates he no longer speaks to. He called them the uncounted. Children, mostly. Silent. Faceless, moving through matter like mist. Watching, always watching. They don't talk, Caleb said once. They don't need to. That answer unsettled even the most hardened of researchers. Because Caleb had never asked questions like a child. He asked like a man who already knew the answer and just wanted to see if you did too. In his room, he drew symbols on the walls. Not words, not pictures. Symbols, angular, unnatural. Some matched ancient Sumerian glyphs. Others mirrored cave etchings found 7,000 miles away in the Himalayas. No one taught him these. No books had been smuggled in. And yet he traced them over and over again with perfect, unbroken rhythm. Dr. Rowe once made the mistake of erasing one with a cloth. That night, every clock in the building stopped at 1:17 a.m. Every door in the lower wing jammed shut. Locks melted from the inside. For security staff reported hearing whispers in reverse. They reopened the symbol the next morning, and everything went silent again. When asked where he learned the markings, Caleb answered, "The hollow places, beneath the walls." He said it like a fact, not a riddle. And when Dr. Harding, the neurologist overseeing him, pushed further, Caleb whispered, "We were never supposed to stay on this side. Stay, not be, stay." That means he came from somewhere else. Now ask yourself, what kind of child walks into our world like that? And more importantly, what kind of world did he leave behind? You see, this isn't just about Caleb Morgan. This is about the boundaries of human perception, the lie of solidity, the illusion that walls protect us. They don't. They contain us. And some children were born without containment. Now here's where the real descent begins. The deeper they studied Caleb, the more the Institute's walls began to whisper back. Electrical pulses became erratic in his wing. Machines failed without cause. Metal warped slightly near where he stood. Water condensed on surfaces that should have been dry. It was as if his presence was slowly bending the rules of reality inside out. One nurse, Meredith Clay, wrote in her journal, "It's not just what he does. It's what he changes. Being near him is like standing beside a humming generator. but the hum is in your bones, and it knows your name. Then came the incident in Corridor B, a turning point buried even deeper than the rest. A visiting physicist, Dr. Abel Hart, had been called in from Chicago. A known skeptic, he believed Caleb was a hoax, the product of trauma, hallucination, or collective madness. On day 2, he demanded to be left alone in the corridor outside Caleb's room. At precisely 2 a.m., the cameras caught Dr. Hart pacing. Then static. Only 6 seconds of interference. When the feed resumed, Hart was gone. No forced entry. No broken lock. Just his ID badge, embedded inside the reinforced glass of Caleb's observation window. No crack. No mark. Just matter intersecting matter. The impossible, now, sitting quietly in plain sight. Caleb hadn't moved. He was seated in the far corner, humming softly. When staff entered, Caleb looked up and said one thing. He knows now. Dr. Hart was found 6 days later, wandering barefoot in the Appalachian woods nearly 400 miles away. He could no longer speak. His fingertips were raw. His retinas showed signs of exposure to extreme bursts of light, but no damage to the optic nerve. When questioned, all he would write was, "It's hollow. The world is hollow." After that, the Institute lost 5 more staff in 3 weeks. Transfers, resignations, 1 suicide. Caleb was moved again, deeper this time. Farther underground. Lead walls were thickened. Observation was reduced. The government no longer wanted to understand him. They wanted to contain him. But Caleb didn't resist. Because he had already seen the end of the maze. And the real secret? He was never locked in with them. They were locked in with him WY late spring of 1872. The order came from the highest level, silence the anomaly. No more witnesses. The directive was delivered not through official channels, but by a man known only as Agent Verity. No badge, no records, just a black coat, a sealed envelope, and a voice that cut through authority like a knife through gauze. He didn't speak like a soldier. He spoke like someone giving instructions on a game whose outcome was already decided. His task was simple: erase Caleb Morgan. Not kill. Erase. Remove from history. Scrub from record. Render untraceable. But something strange happened the night Agent Verity arrived at St. Albans. He never made it inside. Security found his coat and boots neatly placed at the facility gate at 3:01 a.m. No blood. No struggle. Just a single word burned into the grass. Unworthy. After that, everything changed. Caleb stopped speaking. He stopped eating. He stopped blinking. For hours at a time, he would stand perfectly still, eyes wide, as if watching something no one else could see. When nurses waved hands in front of his face, he didn't flinch. When lights were flashed in his eyes, his pupils didn't respond. The cameras began glitching. Every room he entered would lag 6 seconds behind reality. Files went missing. Not just paper files, entire memories. Technicians forgot appointments. Staff misremembered instructions. Some reported waking up in rooms they had no recollection of entering. Dr. Harding, now the only remaining original staff member, began to suspect something no one dared to say aloud. Caleb was affecting time. Not just space. Not just walls. Time itself. One staffer recorded a chilling conversation. Caleb, speaking in a voice colder than usual, said, "Your time is thin. I can see the folds now." What folds? What does a child see when the veil lifts? Harding began, keeping a journal separate from all official records. In it, he wrote, "We're looking at him like he's an anomaly. But what if we're the ones out of place? What if our world is the error, and Caleb is the constant?" Those words were written 3 days before Harding vanished. His office was locked from the inside. No exit, no blood, no trace. Just his pen, still warm, resting on an open page. And the phrase he wrote last? He's not breaking the rules. He's remembering them. The facility began to rot from the inside. Not physically, structurally it stood firm. But the people, the minds within its walls began to fracture. One by one, they reported a shared sensation, as if the walls were breathing, as if the hallways weren't straight anymore, as if the building had begun to fold in on itself. Then came the drawings. Caleb, silent for weeks, suddenly resumed his sketching. But this time he didn't use paper. He scratched lines into the walls with his nails, hundreds of intersecting geometric symbols. Some were impossible shapes, like Penrose triangles and tessellated knots. Others looked like maps, but not of Earth. When an intern traced one of the shapes on a transparency film and laid it over a map of North America, something horrifying aligned perfectly. The Institute's coordinates were the center of a massive, ancient sigil. St. Albans wasn't a hospital. It was a seal, a lock, and Caleb wasn't a problem. He was the key. Staff began to experience bleed-throughs, memories that weren't theirs, visions of events they never lived. Some saw battles and landscapes with two suns. Others swore they remembered drowning in dry air. A few began speaking in dead languages. One nurse carved the word return into her arm in Aramaic without ever learning the language. Paranoia set in. They tried to sedate Caleb again, but he no longer responded to tranquilizers. Not because of tolerance, because his biology had changed. His heartbeat no longer followed human rhythm. His pupils no longer contracted under light. And his fingerprints? Gone. Smooth. Erased, as if his body had decided it no longer needed identity. When pressed for answers, he finally broke his silence. "I was born where light bends backwards," he said. "And they're listening now." That phrase triggered a full facility lockdown. Files were burned, tapes wiped, but they couldn't erase the feeling, the vibration, the sense that something ancient was beginning to wake up inside the walls of St. Albans. At 3:03 a.m. the next morning, every clock in the building shattered at once. July 3rd, 1872. The blackout, the event no one talks about. The night St. Albans vanished from a map. Not physically, but electronically, energetically, psychically. Every communication line went dead. Telegraphs failed. Compasses spun. Horses wouldn't approach within 2 miles. For exactly 108 minutes, the Institute became absent. And in those 108 minutes, something walked through the facility that wasn't Caleb. Survivors described it differently, but one phrase repeated, the figure in reverse. It didn't walk. It glitched forward like a broken reel of film playing backward and forward simultaneously. Eyeless. Fluid. Its form bending the air like heat waves on concrete. Wherever it passed, the walls turned translucent, revealing things beneath. Layers of forgotten stone, shapes that pulsed behind drywall, impossible structures folded into the geometry of the building itself. Caleb stood in the heart of the storm, unshaken, untouched. When a figure approached him, it didn't harm him. It knelt. And then, for the first time in recorded history, the laws of location broke down. Witnesses from 3 different wings claimed Caleb was in their room at the same moment, speaking 3 different sentences. To Dr. Lindley in the observatory, "Your star charts are written on a broken dome." To Nurse Evelyn in the mess hall, "Food has no meaning when you've tasted memory." To Security Chief Rourke by the Eastern Gate, "The gate was never locked. You just forgot how to open it." At precisely 4:17 a.m., the blackout ended. But something was different. St. Albans had lost 4 floors, internally. The exterior structure remained the same, but the interior layout no longer matched blueprints. Hallways led to walls. Doors opened into echoes. One wing was found looping endlessly. 3 men walked forward for 6 hours, only to return to the room they started in. And in the central chamber, where Caleb had last been seen, nothing. No boy, no bed, no instruments. Just a ring of ash and a single word scratched into the floor. Remember. Caleb Morgan was gone. No escape. No body. Just absence. But that's not the terrifying part. The terrifying part is what he left behind. Because each remaining staff member began to dream. Identical dreams. Every night. The same place. The same voice. The dreams grew darker. They weren't just fragments anymore. They were maps. Sequences. Symbols that rearranged themselves night after night into new configurations. By July 9th, 6 staff members had independently drawn the same diagram in their sleep. A spiral staircase descending into black, surrounded by script that predated Sumerian. one linguist, brought in secretly by a remaining doctor, identified the writing as Proto-Elamitic from 3000 BC. But the dialect was wrong. Too advanced. Too intentional. It wasn't a primitive language evolving into meaning. It was meaning devolving into secrecy. What was it hiding? More disturbing still, the dreams came with instructions, subtle but specific. Move this chair to the west wall. Break this mirror at 3:06 a.m. Burn this file. And every time someone followed those dream directions, reality changed slightly. Doors creaked open that had never opened. Lights flickered in sync with heartbeats. And worst of all, the building began to hum. A low, rhythmic vibration, as if something buried far beneath the basement had begun to stir. Geological instruments picked it up. Not seismic, not natural. It had pattern. It pulsed like a language. The remaining staff, now only 9 people, stopped referring to Caleb by name. They called him the Fold. Some believed he had returned, not as a child, but as a force. Not external, not even internal. Fundamental. He wasn't inside the building anymore. He was the building, and then came the split. Nurse Evelyn, once calm, rational, skeptical, suffered a complete neurological break. But not random, not chaotic. She began writing again, nonstop, in her own blood. When doctors sedated her and tried to clean her wounds, they discovered every cut followed perfect geometric alignment. Not self-harm, not madness. Design, like someone or something was writing through her. One message was carved deeper than the rest. Across her sternum, he showed me the other hallway. What hallway? The building was mapped. Every stone, every brick, every blueprint archived. But the next morning, a door appeared behind the main boiler. A door that wasn't there before. Steel. Seamless. No handle. Just a single phrase etched into its surface. You forgot where you came from. They brought in torches, tools, even a small detonation team. Nothing made it budge. And then, at 3:03 a.m., without warning, the door opened on its own. Inside, nothing. Just darkness. And the sound of footsteps walking away. Doctor Lindley made the choice. Despite the protests. Despite the warnings. Despite the way the shadows in the boiler room seemed to stretch longer than the light allowed, he stepped through the door and vanished. No scream, no light, no echo. He simply dissolved into the dark, as if swallowed by a memory that no longer wanted to be remembered. The others waited. 1 hour, then 2. By the 3rd, they agreed. The doorway wasn't just a passage. It was a test, but not of courage, not of reason, of alignment. Something about the space behind that door didn't accept just anyone. It rejected the unprepared. It judged. And that's when the real phenomena began. Not inside the Institute. Outside. Across the countryside. Animals began migrating in spirals. Birds flying in perfect circles. Deer pacing in figure eights. Beehives forming hexagonal corridors pointing towards St. Albans. The land itself reacted, as if echoing the boy's last breath. And people began to see him, not in dreams anymore, in reflections, in steam, in the blur of train windows. Always the same boy, Caleb, standing still, facing them, his hand raised not in warning, but invitation. Every time they blinked, he was closer. A farmer 9 miles west of the facility was found dead in his home, his entire attic ceiling covered in ash and symbols. Written in charcoal, above his bed, the Fold remembers. Researchers, now fully fragmented from any official institution, began decoding the shared symbols. They weren't random. They were coordinates, but not geographic, temporal, moments in time. And when mapped to the Earth's magnetosphere and Schumann resonances, it became clear Caleb's transformation wasn't about escape. It was about reentry. He wasn't leaving this reality. He was rewriting the conditions that formed it, turning walls into doors, turning observers into participants, turning memory into matter. By July 17th, everyone inside St. Albans who had remained since Caleb's vanishing had either disappeared or reported total cognitive dissonance, forgetting who they were mid-sentence, repeating phrases they never learned, staring into walls for hours without blinking. And in the boiler room, The door remained open. Still dark. Still silent. Still calling. Because the boy who could walk through walls didn't just vanish. He became the threshold they called in the military. Not publicly, of course. No uniforms. No insignias. Just men with briefcases, pale faces, and eyes that had seen too much. Project Nimbus, a black-budget division buried under layers of Cold War, psychic warfare programs. Their orders were simple: seal the breach, contain the fold, retrieve the boy, if he still existed. But you don't retrieve a ghost. And you can't contain something that no longer obeys direction, time, or even gravity. The first squad entered at 2:19 a.m. 5 men, armed with sensory disruption gear, infrared mapping drones, frequency jammers. What came out 90 minutes later wasn't a squad. It was one man, Private L. Jenkins, crawling on all fours backward, eyes wide open, whispering something over and over. He made me remember forward. They sedated him. Hooked him to EEG machines. What they found wasn't sleep, wasn't coma. His brain was active at frequencies never charted in human cognition. Frequencies that responded not to sound, but to silence. In other words, Jenkins wasn't hallucinating. He was listening. And deep in the silence, something was speaking back. Dr. Alston, the neurolinguist brought in to study his EEG readouts, decoded a structure in the brainwaves. Not words, not language. Emotion, encoded as geometry. One spike translated to return. Another, mirror, but the final shape repeated again and again. A pattern burned into every frequency. A perfect, impossible shape. A four-dimensional spiral collapsing inward and outward at the same time. Ralston wept when he saw it. Not because it was horrifying, because it was true. You see, every sacred structure in history, pyramids, ziggurats, cathedrals, even crop circles, had hinted at this same configuration. The fold wasn't new. It had always been there, buried in our myths, our gods, our deaths. Caleb just remembered it first. At 3:33 a.m., the boiler room door slammed shut. Not slowly, not with drama, just a quiet, surgical click. The lights in the building dimmed. And for the first time in 3 weeks, St. Albans was silent. No footsteps, no dreams, no glitches, until 4:06 a.m., when every mirror in the facility cracked simultaneously. And in the shards, witnesses didn't see their own reflections. They saw Caleb, smiling, whispering, "You're almost ready." What happens when a building dreams? That's the question no one dared to ask. Because by July 20th, St. Albans wasn't behaving like architecture anymore. It behaved like a memory, trying to remember itself. Ceilings shifted subtly overnight, tiles rearranging into mandala-like patterns. Hallways shortened, then stretched. Doors appeared where there had been none. The facility's own security cameras showed impossible anomalies. People walking into one room and exiting from a floor below without any stairwell. And then it began showing signs of emotion. Temperature fluctuations synced with conversation topics. Speak Caleb's name, and the room would drop 10 degrees. Express disbelief, and the lights would flicker in a rhythm that matched your heart rate. The Institute had become sentient, but not conscious in any human sense. No, it had absorbed something deeper, something primal. It wasn't alive. It was awake. That's when survivors, what few remained, stopped sleeping altogether. Not out of fear, but compulsion. Their brains, magnetically scanned, revealed a startling discovery. Their alpha, beta, and delta wave patterns were syncing with the building itself. Sleep had become collective, not individual dreams. Shared ones. And every person reported seeing the same thing. A staircase. Endless. Spiraling downward. Made of flesh. And at the bottom, Caleb. Only, it wasn't Caleb anymore. It was his form, yes, but made of a lattice of light and sound and ancient glyphs that pulsed like a living manuscript. His face was serene, not threatening, almost divine. But his voice? It didn't come from his mouth. It came from inside the dreamer's bones. And it said one phrase in every dream, every night, break the wall again. And then it would end. Terrified, one technician decided to test it. He recreated the sound signature of the phrase using harmonic resonance generators. Played it once at 3:06 a.m. That night, the ground beneath St. Albans shifted. Seismographs detected a localized anomaly, a frequency quake, not from tectonic plates, from inside the facility, as if something massive and old was rolling beneath the foundation, tried to surface. That morning, 20 birds were found dead in a perfect circle around the building. Inside, on the floor of the East Wing, written in some oily black substance no one could identify, were these words, "You are the wall." The phrase haunted them. You are the wall. It wasn't just symbolic. It was instructional, a revelation hiding in plain sight. The barrier wasn't physical. It was us, our perception, our limitation, our refusal to believe that the world bends not around laws, but around attention. The fold had never been a place. It had always been a mirror, reflecting back the boundaries we agreed to live within. And Caleb? He simply refused. He didn't walk through walls. He walked through belief systems. But something followed him back. Something that had waited a long time. Because the moment Caleb stopped being a boy and became a threshold, the contract shifted. The containment broke, and what we used to call reality started bargaining. One by one, the remaining researchers at St. Albans began to vanish. Not all at once. Not violently. Elegantly. Dr. Morris was last seen calmly walking into the Northern Library, which hadn't existed in the original floor plans. The security footage shows her pausing at the entrance, tilting her head as if listening to music only she could hear, then smiling softly like a child seeing something beautiful for the first time, and stepping inside. The footage ends. The room was empty when the team arrived, except for a single, handwritten note left on the table. He forgives you, but the room remembers. Attempts to scan the foundation digitally began returning impossible feedback loops. LiDAR mapping showed hallways longer on the inside than outside. One room had become 300 feet wide, despite being confined to a 30-foot space. Gravity fluctuated in bursts. Time moved irregularly. Some clocks even counted backward. A physics consultant from Zurich fainted after measuring magnetic interference from the boiler room, because the readings exactly matched his own dream from 2 nights prior. He hadn't told anyone. How could a building know what you dreamed? And more importantly, how could it remember it before you did? Late that night, the facility pulsed again. Lights out, floor tremor, and then, echoing through every speaker, phone, earpiece, and even unconnected headsets. You're not supposed to forget. That's how they keep you inside. That was the first time anyone used the word they. As if something else was behind the veil. Something that benefited from our amnesia. And Caleb? He wasn't just walking through the wall anymore. He was unbuilding it. One memory at a time. // by now. The outside world had begun to notice. But not in headlines. Not in news coverage. No, this kind of story doesn't leak. It bleeds. All across Vermont, reports began to surface of time disturbances. People blacking out for exactly 33 minutes. Waking up with dirt under their nails and no memory of leaving their homes. Children began drawing spiral staircases and writing phrases in languages they had never been taught. Languages later identified as Proto-Sumerian glyphs and Enochian angel script. A farmer 80 miles from St. Albans claimed his tractor wouldn't start because every time he turned the key, a child's voice whispered from the engine, "He's still walking." And in a hospital in Montpelier, an elderly patient in a coma for 6 years sat up, stared straight ahead, and repeated a phrase 15 times. The wall never kept him out. It kept you in. Back at St. Albans, the walls were now transparent. Not to sight, to intention. You could walk through if you believed you could. And many did. One man stepped through the west perimeter and instantly vanished. His watch was found fused into the wall, still ticking, but counting days in negative numbers. The facility was no longer a building. It was becoming a threshold, a membrane between 2 planes of existence. And Caleb? He wasn't inside it anymore. He was it. The fold had merged with him, or perhaps it had always been him. There was no way to tell where his body ended and the distortion began. A neuroscientist named Halvorson finally posed the question that silenced the room. What if Caleb didn't open the fold? What if the fold created Caleb? Because something wanted in, and it needed a key. Not metal, not digital, a mind. One pure enough to believe the impossible. One untouched by cynicism, fear, trauma. A child's mind. And in 1872, that mind belonged to Caleb Morgan. The orphan. The invisible boy. The empty file in the census. They thought he was the anomaly, but he was the invitation. And now the door was open. Every mirror, every shadow, every moment of déjà vu, they weren't glitches. They were rehearsals. Because something had been training us to remember. And now it wanted us to follow. To 8t exactly 2:47 a.m. on August 2nd, the dreams changed. Everyone in contact with St. Albans, directly or indirectly, reported the same shift. The staircase was gone, replaced by a room. It wasn't frightening. It was familiar. Old wood floors, dust-laced sunlight, a child's drawings taped to the wall, a toy train circling endlessly on bent tracks, and a small bed, perfectly made. Caleb's room. But he wasn't there. Instead, sitting at the edge of the bed was yourself but younger. Maybe 6, maybe 7. Looking up, smiling. Not in fear, in recognition. Then the child would ask in your voice, "Do you remember what they took?" Every dreamer answered differently. Some said my voice. Others whispered, "My mother." One cried and replied, "Time." And each time, the child nodded, stood, and walked toward the mirror hanging beside the dresser. But instead of a reflection, the glass revealed a door, the same door from the restricted West Wing of St. Albans. That door had been sealed since 1872. No hinges, no lock, no handle, only a phrase etched in the wood in crude, jagged strokes. Enter as you were. What they found behind that door was never officially documented. But unofficially, every single witness gave the same account. A room made of memory. Its walls were not constructed. They were composed of thoughts, looping in radiant filaments. Each corner of the room played a different recollection, a scream buried, a touch forgotten, a joy repressed, a lie accepted. It wasn't a place for storage. It was where the erased went. And in the center of it stood Caleb. But he was no longer a boy. He was plural. Thousands of flickering versions of himself, layered like translucent paper, laughing, crying, dancing, hiding, all collapsing into one fluid form. And when he spoke, it wasn't to the room. It was to you, directly. You gave it permission. Every time you said, "That's just the way it is." You built it, brick by thought, cemented with silence. Then he raised his hand and pointed to your chest. But you're not a prisoner. You're a brick, and you can crack. The room began to tremble. Memories poured from the walls like liquid light. And for the first time, you felt it. The memory of a self before the edits. Before fear. Before conformity. Before forgetting. And in that moment, you realized you weren't dreaming. You were remembering. When the room finally collapsed, it didn't crumble. It peeled. Like old wallpaper revealing something underneath. A pattern. A map. A language written in memory itself. Everyone who entered the fold, whether in person or dream, began reporting the same strange phenomenon. They could now read people. Not just their emotions. Their oppressions. It was like reality had been rewritten in a new syntax, where lies had weight and silence glowed in the dark. People began glitching in conversation, repeating phrases they didn't mean to say, exposing thoughts they hadn't spoken in decades. One woman described watching her husband's face melt into his 7-year-old self mid-argument. Not metaphorically, literally. And in that moment, he began crying and whispered, "Please don't lock the door again, Mama." He had no memory of saying it, because the fold doesn't forget. Not anymore. And the more the phenomenon spread, the clearer it became. This wasn't a haunting. It was a reintegration. Pieces of ourselves, traumas, fragments, suppressions, were returning. Fast, forceful, without permission. Not to hurt us, but to complete us. Because something had been feeding off the gaps in our psyche. Every unspoken truth. Every swallowed scream. Every dream postponed because someone told you it was unrealistic. That wasn't forgetfulness. That was extraction, and it had a source. The files from St. Albans were finally decrypted by an anonymous cryptographer using sleep-based machine learning. Inside was a single classified phrase, tagged, redacted, then hidden in a Level 5 blackout archive. Project Palimpsest. Palimpsest. A manuscript written over and over, with traces of the old text always bleeding through. They weren't experimenting on Caleb. They were experimenting on consciousness itself, trying to overwrite fear, control thought, rebuild human beings into something cleaner, more predictable, less free. But Caleb didn't comply. He remembered everything. And in doing so, he shattered the simulation's prime directive: forget to remain. He chose to remain whole. And now the infection of truth was spreading. In dreams, in mirrors, in déjà vu so intense, it physically pulled people to their knees. One man in New Jersey screamed during a therapy session, "This isn't the first time I've lived this day, and I still can't forgive her." His therapist? She said the exact same thing at the exact same time. They both wept, because for the first time in decades, they weren't healing. They were remembering. The fold had been inside all along, and now it was awake. You've probably felt it already. The hum beneath your skin when you're alone in a quiet room. The sudden pressure in your chest when someone says your name just a little too softly. That moment when time slips, you look at the clock and it's been an hour or maybe just 3 minutes and nothing in your body makes sense. That's not anxiety. That's recall. Something buried is surfacing, and your body knows before your brain does. Hospitals started calling it mirror panic syndrome, an uptick in patients claiming their reflections moved before they did, or didn't blink, or mouthed words they weren't speaking. But when researchers played the surveillance footage back, the mirrors were black. Not blank, black, as if absorbing light, as if watching. And the reports kept escalating. Children drawing the same door from the west wing of St. Albans, down to the carvings. Adults waking up mid-sentence with coordinates burned into their minds. Coordinates that pointed to abandoned asylums, collapsed mines, and sealed Cold War bunkers. And most disturbing, a pattern of people suddenly speaking in unrecognized tongues. Languages linguists claim don't exist, but feel familiar. Experts tried calling it a mass psychogenic event. But when entire prison blocks, isolated from the world, began chanting in unison, even the skeptics shut up. The language? It translated to, "Do not fix what was broken on purpose." The deeper researchers went, the more they realized they were looking at something more than trauma, more than history. They were looking at a defense mechanism. Like the human brain, reality had built walls to protect itself from what it couldn't contain. But Caleb? He was a crack in that wall, not to destroy it, to remind us, because we had agreed to forget. That was the great horror of Project Winterdoor. It didn't imprison Caleb. It tried to erase what he remembered. And what he remembered wasn't just a room. It wasn't even a time. It was a before. Before programming. Before obedience. Before the world was divided into real and unreal. He remembered when we were limitless. And now? So, do you ever wonder why children see things adults can't? Why they talk to people who aren't there? Why they draw symbols they've never learned? Why they sometimes stare into corners like they're listening to a voice we've forgotten how to hear? It's not imagination. It's residue. Memory from before the fold of compliance. Before the brain was taught to filter what shouldn't be seen. Children don't hallucinate. They remember. And that's what made Caleb dangerous. Not his silence. Not his defiance. But his clarity. He remembered pure perception. He remembered the real architecture of this world. And so did the others. They were called the Echo Class. 13 subjects across the country, all born within 44 days of Caleb Morgan. All raised in engineered environments. Fostered, watched, recorded, dosed. And then, silenced. All except Caleb. Because Caleb activated. He didn't just survive Winterdoor. He inverted it. The project's final report, uncovered in a Vatican-owned archive in Croatia, listed a termination code next to Caleb's file. Experiment exceeded permissible entropy. Recommend metaphysical quarantine. Entropy. That's the word they used when the rules stopped working. And they did. Completely. Digital clocks stopped working within 3 miles of St. Albans. Compasses spun. Hard drives wiped themselves clean. Even the sky changed. Pilots flying over the facility reported stars in wrong positions, constellations missing. But the most terrifying anomaly? No birds. For 14 square miles. No flight, no chirping, no nests. Just absence. Because even nature recognized what was happening, a return. Not a boy, of a frequency. Caleb wasn't a person anymore. He was a signal, one that awakens the dormant, one that reminds you that every fear you've ever buried was not your own. It was installed. And if Caleb could walk through walls, not to escape, but to reveal, then what else have you been told is impossible that was only hidden? That inner voice you silence? That pattern you keep dreaming? That door you always imagine in the back of your childhood home? They're not memories. They're maps, leading back to the parts of you they couldn't erase. And the closer you get to that forgotten self, the thinner the veil becomes. And the fold? It starts to recognize you. They called it a psycho-spiritual breakdown. But it wasn't a breakdown. It was a decoding. Because when enough people started remembering Caleb, not as a boy, but as a phenomenon, the physical world responded. Streetlights flickered when certain phrases were spoken. Elevators skipped floors that didn't exist. Entire buildings began appearing on maps, then vanishing the next day, as if reality was testing your focus. The old language returned. Not in books, not in voices, but in sensation. People described waking up with tastes in their mouths they couldn't name. Tones in their ears that matched no known frequency. Dreams where they could see sound and touch gravity. And in every case, a door. Always the same shape. Always cold. Always sealed with a single phrase etched across the top. Remember in full or do not enter at all. One woman tried to draw the door during an EEG brain scan. Her brain waves went into theta state immediately, deep, subconscious flow. Then she flatlined. For 46 seconds, she was clinically dead. When she came back, she whispered, there were no guards on the other side, only mirrors. The doctors didn't believe her. But the tape of her vitals recorded something terrifying, a second heartbeat. Not hers, not the baby she miscarried 7 years prior. Something else, something in sync with the fold. And that's when it became undeniable. This wasn't about Caleb. It never was. He was the proof, the evidence that we've been fractured, that the self we present is a decoy, a shield, a survival script written to protect us from a world engineered to extract compliance. You were born whole, then taught to forget, taught to obey, taught to dim every light inside you that couldn't be monetized, monitored, or measured. Caleb wasn't a miracle. He was a mirror, showing us who we were before the trauma, before the programming, before the conditioning trained us to fear our own power. And when you walk through the wall like Caleb did, you don't disappear. You don't die. You don't lose your mind. You just see the original design, and it's so much bigger than what they told you. It's limitless, and it's already waking up inside you. What if the final prison isn't made of bars, walls, or cells, but certainty? What if the most dangerous thing they gave you wasn't pain, but a name? Because once they name you, they own your story. And once they own your story, they control your limits. That was the final layer of Project Winterdoor. Not just to test Caleb, but to redefine him, to strip him of every meaning that didn't serve them. They labeled him mentally divergent. They called him pre-schizotypal. They framed his abilities as illness, framed his rebellion as instability, framed his silence as a threat. And then they wrote textbooks about him. Entire university courses labeled what he saw as delusions. Because that's how control works. They don't kill your truth. They diagnose it. But the truth didn't die. It multiplied. Every person who saw Caleb walk through that wall began to question one more thing about their reality. And questioning, true questioning, is viral. It's infectious. Because the moment you realize that one law of reality can be broken, you start to wonder how many others were never real to begin with. That's the danger of one boy doing the impossible. He reminds you that every part of your life that feels caged might be unlocked. So here's the real question. What story did they give you? What labels did you inherit? Too sensitive? Too loud? Too weird? Too emotional? Now ask yourself, who benefits from you believing that? Because what Caleb proved, what they buried, sealed, and silenced, is this: your strangeness was never a flaw. It was a frequency. And your suffering? That was the cost of trying to mute it. You weren't broken. You were tuned differently. And when you finally stop fighting that frequency, when you let it sing, you don't become someone else. You return to who you've always been, the unfiltered, unfolded, unrepentant version of you, the one they were so afraid of. They built an entire institution to erase it. But it's back now. You're back now, and nothing will ever cage you again. They say trauma runs in families, passed down like eye color or bone density. But what if that's not the whole truth? What if the thing passed down isn't trauma? It's awareness. Raw, untamed awareness that didn't belong in a world addicted to comfort. The Morgan bloodline had been monitored for 93 years before Caleb's birth. Why? Because every few generations, one of them remembered. Not remembered facts, but remembered freedom. Caleb's great-grandmother, Etta Morgan, was institutionalized in 1911 for speaking a language no scholar could identify, but every child under the age of 6 understood. His uncle disappeared from a locked room after carving a perfect replica of the winter door symbol into the wall, with no tools, no paint. And Caleb? He was the first who didn't run, didn't scream, didn't fold under pressure. He just watched. That's what terrified them. His ability to observe the system without internalizing it, to see a lie and not absorb it, to be offered fear and return silence. You see, most people don't need cages. They've been trained to self-police. But Caleb's mind didn't bind. He didn't question himself. He questioned the architecture. And when the Fold realized this, they activated Protocol Dusk, the final phase. Not containment, not erasure, but distortion. They began seeding new stories. Internet forums flooded with fake witnesses, fake timelines, AI-generated footage of Caleb attacking staff, melting through floors like a monster. Why? Because truth is fragile. And if they can't erase it, they'll confuse it until no one believes anything at all. But what they didn't count on was you. You, the one watching this. You, who feels like you've seen this before in a dream you never told anyone about. You, who hears certain sounds and gets chills for no logical reason. You are part of this memory. You carry the code in your instincts, your intuition, your refusal to just accept what you're told. And that's why they fear you. Because one awakened person is unpredictable, but one remembering person, that's unstoppable. You don't need proof. You're the proof. And Caleb's not gone. He's inside the signal that just got louder the second you read this. They lied about time. That's the root of it. They told you it was linear, a straight road from birth to death, a one-way street where memories fade and futures remain sealed. But Caleb shattered that illusion the moment he stepped through. Because what if time doesn't pass? What if it layers? Like a spiral, like a coil tightening around your consciousness, until you remember that every version of you still exists, waiting to be reaccessed. The scientists who survived the winter door collapse reported something obscene. They said when Caleb vanished, the walls began to bleed numbers. Not red, not literal blood, but coordinates, dates, names. One lab assistant wrote the phrase, "You are not stuck." You were looped 108 times on the wall before blacking out. And when he awoke, he didn't recognize his own hands, because they weren't his anymore. They belonged to the version of him that didn't comply. Time didn't erase that self. It just tucked it away, waiting for the right frequency, Caleb's frequency, to bring it back. Do you understand now? Your suffering didn't start with you. It started before you. It was installed like a firewall, an ancestral block designed to keep you out of your own timeline. But the wall isn't real. Caleb proved that. You're not stuck. You're not lost. You've just been running someone else's program. But the source code? It's still inside you. And when you stop obeying the story, when you stop repeating the grief that was never yours to begin with, you snap the loop. That's what scares them most. Not rebellion. Correction. When you start to self-correct, to reclaim the raw data of your identity, your power, your unfiltered memory, you don't need gates. You don't need keys. You become the door. And when you walk through yourself, you don't come out better. You come out whole. And a whole human is the last thing they ever wanted to exist. The night Caleb vanished, every camera in the Winter Door facility glitched simultaneously for exactly 44 seconds. Not blackouts. Not static. Each screen showed something else entirely. A mirror, but not a reflection. What they saw was themselves, but altered, aged differently, standing in unfamiliar rooms with expressions they'd never worn. One technician dropped dead on the spot. Another clawed at his eyes, repeating, "It wasn't me. I was never that man." Because the mirror didn't lie. It showed them the version of themselves they chose not to become. That was Caleb's final gift to the observers. He didn't destroy the system. He made them see it. The prison of roles. The lie of professionalism. The mask of clinical detachment. And that's when Winter Door finally collapsed. Not from chaos, but from confrontation. Because when truth enters a place built on repression, it doesn't whisper. It screams. And every person inside that facility heard it. Some quit. Some vanished. Some claimed they now dreamed in binary, in equations, in symbols they'd never studied. One, Dr. Meredith Lane, wrote a single sentence before disappearing into the Arctic. He wasn't breaking through the wall. The wall was breaking through us. Let that sit. Because this isn't just about Caleb. This is about you. Have you ever felt a pull towards something you couldn't name? Ever glimpsed a version of your life so real, yet impossibly out of reach? That wasn't delusion. That was your mirror moment. The system told you to ignore it, to medicate it, to rationalize it away. But Caleb came to remind you, those fragments you keep seeing, they are you, from a timeline that was stolen. Not by fate, by design. And the moment you stop dismissing them, you begin to return to the self that never agreed to shrink, to the voice that never signed the silence contract, to the power that never once asked permission to become real. You don't need to escape. You just need to remember, because you are not watching this by accident. You are watching this because you already walked through 1B by the time federal agents arrived at the collapsed Winter Door facility. It was already too late. There were no bodies, no files, no technology left intact. Only one thing remained. A single sentence etched into the floor, burned into the tile. Not with fire, but frequency. You cannot own what remembers itself. They tried to suppress it. The reports were sealed. The agents reassigned. The location officially designated a tectonic anomaly site, fenced off and scrubbed from satellite data. But something slipped through. Not a person, not a document, a feeling, like static in your soul, like the sense that something isn't quite aligned, no matter how hard you try to fit into the life handed to you. Because here's the truth they never wanted you to piece together. Caleb wasn't a freak occurrence. He was a signal, a test of the containment grid, and it failed, not because he escaped, but because you noticed. Yes, you felt the glitch. You watched this video and something inside you stirred, not with fear, but recognition. Because part of you is already on the other side. That's why certain memories feel like dreams. Why some strangers feel too familiar. Why you sometimes feel like you're living inside a life you didn't fully choose. Because you were programmed to forget, to accept the script, to stay inside the timeline. But Caleb cracked it open, and now the choice is yours. You could go back to sleep, wrap yourself in logic and labels, and ignore that tug in your chest. Or you can do the only thing that truly breaks the system. Remember. Remember that your instincts are not hallucinations. Your pain is not weakness. It's resistance. Your strange visions, your recurring numbers, your déjà vu, they're the breadcrumbs left by the real you. The pre-tamed you. And here's the twist they never saw coming. They thought Caleb was the threat. But it was never about him escaping. It was about you awakening. Because when enough people remember what was done to them, when enough of us step through our own walls, there won't be anything left to control. Only the signal. Only the self. Only the return. This isn't the end. This is the activation. Because now you know, Caleb Morgan wasn't some strange myth locked in 1872. He wasn't a ghost or a rumor or a government experiment gone wrong. He was a mirror sent ahead of you. A prototype soul who refused to be owned, labeled, studied, or tamed. And the real reason they feared him? He triggered the awakening protocol. You felt it, haven't you? The itching in your mind when things don't line up. The sense of invisible rules you never agreed to. The weight of 1,000 eyes, even when you're alone. That's not paranoia. That's surveillance collapse. What happens when your consciousness begins to outgrow the cage? They taught you to fear walls you can see. But Caleb revealed the walls you were born inside. Not brick, not steel. Belief. Beliefs that told you, you're small, you're broken, you're ordinary. Reality is fixed. Obey or be erased. But guess what? Those beliefs were programmed. And every time you feel rage for no reason, every time your dreams crack open and show you places you've never been, every time you feel like the world isn't real, that's not madness. That's clarity trying to break through. Caleb didn't just walk through walls. He walked through the limits of the mind. And when they realized it couldn't be undone, they buried his name, sealed the case, and prayed you'd never feel the signal. But here you are, hearing it, feeling it, becoming it. You were never just a viewer of this story. You were the target. And now, the code is unlocked. You are the system's glitch. You are the memory that won't fade. You are the return they cannot stop. Caleb walked through the wall. Now it's your turn. Don't knock. Don't wait. Just remember and step through.